Hail, citizens, legates. I am Joe. Here with me is my co-host, military tribune Dan.
Greetings.
And today we have another Rome Cinema podcast video for you all. And this time, it's a markedly better episode than last time. Last time was fun with the Varinus and Pullo stuff. This episode has a Roman party or two. So, of course, it's a lot funner. But we get a lot more characterization and whatnot. Actually, in this episode, the vendetta between Attia and Servilia is a lot more interesting. It's kept a little more subtle, a little more in the background, and that I like. There's a little more development here, and there's more room for the actresses to kind of breathe, I find. So that, I'm going to be honest, the trouble is that the plot between Attia and Servilia and whatnot should be the D plot, not the B or A plot. The A plot has to be something like Caesar or Varinus and Pullo. And the B plot, well, actually, technically, the Attia stuff is the B plot, or the D plot to Varinus and Pullo. Well, Pullo, and then Varinus, and then there's Caesar. It goes in that order. Octavius is like the E plot, but I actually think that that should be ahead of Attia. Because Octavius was probably the most important person in the history of Roman politics. Like, it does not get any more important than him. And if anyone's going to say, what do you expect this to be a biographical series of Octavius? Yes, I do. I do. He was heir to the empire for all intents and purposes at this point. So, of course, he's important. And I know people will say it's not an empire yet. Well, in all but name. And the reality is that in a lot of ways, Julius Caesar, or Julius Caesar, was the first emperor. Or at least the first princeps, I guess you could say. But the other first princeps was Octavius, or Augustus Caesar. Met in this episode, the ladies are squabbling. Lady's gonna lady, I guess. I'm joking. I shouldn't be so patronizing. Hey, in my defense, je suis français. We're all like that. So, I should know I just spent some time in Quebec. The Quebecois are like that as well. No joke, actually. They crack so many jokes. They're so fun. Oh, I love my people. Mais en tout cas, la réalité, c'est que you have, on the other hand, Caesar who's bribing the chief augur and other officials, and starting to run into some minor financial problems because it's expensive bribing people. Now, by this time, Caesar was Pontifex Maximus. What's this title? Pontifex Maximus was head of the religion. Later, when the Christians' faith became the chief religion, the state religion of Rome, the title of Pontifex Maximus was passed over to the Bishop of Rome. You might know him by the title of Pope. And Caesar at the time had this title of sorts. So this made him the head of the Roman religion. And what this meant was that he had a lot of influence. Because while the nobles might have used the religion a bit like a political tool, the peasants certainly put a lot of importance on the religion. As peasants always do. And so you got Caesar who's trying to jockey and bribe and try to find a way to get the city on his side. He's trying to sell to Italia, that is to say the lands of the Italian peninsula, his war. He's got to sell them. And the thing is, you have, as Varinus words it at one point in the episode, the trouble of the Civil War is that it would be Roman blood that would be spilt. A war between the Romans was not something the Romans at this time were keen on. They've already had like near to 60 years, maybe 70 or 80 years of this. Like you had the Gracchi brothers, you had after that the Marius and Sulla conflicts that went on for quite some time. So by this point the Romans are quite fed up and nervous. And they still got a lot of years of civil war and bloodletting to go through. they're very nervous. So Caesar's got to sell this very unpopular war to his people and get their support. He doesn't have a choice. He has to. So he's got to sell this to them. But it's all about marketing. It's not about location. It's about marketing. How are you going to sell this to the people? Well, religion's a powerful tool for that. And that's because that the people believe that this would not be favorable in the eyes of the gods. And they would probably be right. And the trouble is, Caesar disagrees. And so he's got to tell them that the gods are on his side. And let's be honest, historically, when you're as lucky as Caesar, it's an easy sell to believe that the gods favor him. I'm just saying, it's an easy sell. But historically, it wasn't so easy. So this episode delves into the psychology of the Romans and how this civil war business, it's nasty. Bad for business. Bad for the entire country. Can't blame them. But the thing is, there was a brief drama historically when Caesar arrived in the city and there was an attempt to remove the gold. Caesar arrived and found the gold, or so goes the story. It had gone missing. He found it, because of course he did. He's that lucky. And then what he did was he appropriated the funds for himself. For bribing officials, for raising armies, and generally used it for himself. Yeah, that you might question the legality of it, but one has to bear in mind, government is a system of transferring wealth from you, the poor, to them, the rich. This is how government has always functioned. And at times, a state has not always functioned this way. You look at Augustus's government, it was very much one that actually held together an empire. Julius Caesar's imperial government, and I say that, and I use the term loosely, was about transferring wealth to Caesar and to building up a clientele of nobles who would serve as a kind of aristocratic, bureaucratic structure to help him run this country. I don't know what other term to use it, because it's not yet an empire. It's a republic, or res publica, a commonwealth of territories conquered by Rome. And running this is very tough. Well, you need a big advanced bureaucracy that the world's never seen at the time. And by this time in history, only really the Han Chinese Empire had a bureaucracy like that. But unfortunately, they're off on the other side of the planet, so no, you can't really learn from them. Which leaves the Romans having to scramble to put something together. This is where Augustus came in and figured it out, because he was a genius. And Caesar figured out some of it, but not everything. The problem is he displeased a lot of people along the way. And so in this episode, he's struggling to find his little treasury gold. Meanwhile, Pullo's found it. And Pullo's having fun being rich, because it's the first time he's rich. But unfortunately, he doesn't, invest a wealth. He doesn't quite, well, he ends up broadcasting it. And he kind of ends up being a little obnoxious with his wealth. As obnoxious as, say, oversimplified is when telling people to use NordVPN. Okay. No, we don't have a sponsorship. I wish.
Yeah.
That would really go to some distance to helping us financially. But no, we don't have a NordVPN contract. I wish. But actually, hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, NordVPN. I'm kidding. But actually, in all seriousness, the trouble is Pullo is very foolish. And the Pompeian, the Catonian faction, I should say, know that the gold has gone missing. They set it up to go missing. But the problem is it's gone even more missing than they would have liked. Now to the B plot. Varenus. Varenus has been finding civilian life harder to manage than what he expected. Story of my life. A schiattale is that he's wanting to set up a feast as an inauguration for his new business, which is mostly going to be an import business of slaves, goods, and whatnot, and truffles. Truffles. And yes, I'm hungry. But anyways, other than me being French, the thing is, Varenus starts to make buddies with Orestes Fullman, who's going to be important later in the series, who's a rather shady individual. But the thing is, just as he's selling his slave business, which you have to bear in mind, at the time, it wasn't, the Romans didn't have the same perception that we did about it all. And even then, in a lot of places, slaves were treated pretty well. But in other places, not so well. And, the truth is that the situation was remarkably complicated and unpleasant to a large extent. And how shall I put it? The trouble is that just as the party's getting underway, Laiode, the sister of Niobe, who's having marital problems, gets drunk, freaks out, and accidentally smashes the statue of the god Janus, the god of change, of new beginnings and redemption, a god of just as much darkness as he is light. So, very important deity. And you smash his statue, or at least the bust, to this god. That's a bad omen. And Varenus is very discomfited. And in the next scene, he tells his wife, your sister and her husband can never come back here. Like, I don't want anything to do with them. They brought their family drama into this party and smashed my statue. And now nobody's going to talk to us or look at us because they believe we're kind of cursed. Well, he doesn't put it in so many words, but the implication is there. So he's just saying, your sister and her husband can never come back here. And his wife, Niobe, goes, yeah, as you say. She's more than happy to go with that idea because she's just, honestly, yes, she had a kid with Evander, but the kid was all but forced on her. Evander's being a jerk and constantly, he's actually genuinely kind of stalking and harassing her. She's just made peace with her husband, and Evander's wanting fun time with her. Are you kidding me? The guy's as bad as Lancelot.
If, get a clue, buddy. You have a wife.
Yeah. And Laiode, of course, poor woman, is being tormented by her unfaithful, horrid husband because, poor girl, she's a victim in all this. So you've just got Varenus, Niobe, and Laiode just kind of going, get a clue, bucko. And it's just not going over well. So, yeah, this doesn't look well for Varenus. Pompeius's fictional son, why not use one of his actual sons? I don't know. They just had to invent one. This is utterly ridiculous. Just use an actual historic figure for heaven's sake. Anyways, comes in and threatens Niobe and Varenus because it's the thing to do. Because he thinks because the head of the scouts was Varenus. Obviously, he must have the gold. Turns out Varenus didn't. So he asks, okay, did you or did you not find some grain wagons on the road? Yeah. Why? Did they have grain? Is essentially the reaction. No! You know what was inside them? What? You didn't crack them open? No, we had orders. There was no time. Why would I break my orders when that could mean I die? You must have cracked it open. I don't believe you. But I just spelled out why I wouldn't crack them open. Yeah, but I don't believe you.
If, you went to a lower quarter.
And then the guy says, yeah, I'm not going to screw around with my orders. I'm just going to do what I'm told. Hello! If he's that serious and that has that much of a stick up his rear. Varenus is a guy whom you just talk to. He's got a bigger stick up his rear than Cyclops from X-Men comics. He does, Dan. And actually, I'd argue it causes a lot more psychological torment for poor Varenus than it ever did Cyclops, who has some sociopathic moments. I mean, let's not even get into Madeline Pryor.
Oh boy.
That is entirely Cyclops' fault. But you look at Varenus, almost nothing that happens is his fault per se. Almost nothing. But anyways, Polo comes along, comes to the rescue, and Varenus ends up teaming up with him, and they defeat the guards off screen, which I don't mind this scene being off screen. It makes more sense because it means we get more plot scene. I like more plot scenes. This series gets it. And we get the funniest scene of possibly this season, just of Polo going, okay, so I say we make off with the gold, we ride into the night, we can make for the coast, and no one will be the wiser, we'll be the richest men in the empire. Or the Res Publica. And you have Varenus, okay, shut up, I'm trying to think. Oh, what's wrong with my idea? What's wrong? Other than the fact that it's a mortal sin, you've been parading and broadcasting to everyone your theft, and by sunrise, everyone will know where you are here in my house. Yeah, and my wife was nearly killed on your account. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Polo is looking like, oh yeah, that's a problem. And then you have Varenus, who then says, you're gonna just have to give the treasury gold back. Give it back. Here's me. My wife was nearly... That's when Varenus burst out. My wife was nearly killed here. Like, dude, I'm not going to steal this thing, especially when there's no way we can keep the gold. You have to return it, and it's your own mess. Get yourself out of it. Because, yeah, it's this last part, because Polo goes, but you're going to come with me, right? No. This is your problem. This is your fault. You deal with it. Is essentially the message, and Polo goes, fine, be that way for all intents and purposes. And I just love how
Like some petulant child.
you have Varenus motioning to the door for him, like, yeah, there's the door, and Polo stomps out childishly. And then the next scene's also funny when Polo reports and goes, listen, if I had known the gold was the city's, I wouldn't have stolen it. But you see, there was this girl here, and never mind the girl. What's this about gold? Oh, yeah. I kind of robbed you. Whoops, by the way, is essentially his response. And it's like, Polo, you freaking idiot.
And that's exactly why Caesar spared him. You were an incompetent idiot of a thief.
Well, yeah, he says that. You're an incompetent thief. But I think I'm going to treat your incompetence as a form of sincerity or something. And Fortune's taking you for a pet because you just so happen to find this gold. And, you know, I'm in a good mood because you're giving the gold and you haven't spent much of it. He didn't. Just a few 100 gold coins, which in the grand scheme of things, not much. Technically, it is a lot. But that's probably millions in today's wealth. And the fact that Polo could run through 100 gold coins back then, I have no idea. Like, he's given this fortune by Caesar just 100 gold coins. Even for back then, that's a lot. Gold never loses its value, you see? And the problem is, Polo goes and spends a bunch. Like, we gotta bear in mind, he's all but broke within a few episodes. Now, I know that there's a fast way to run through this money with debaucheries and whatnot, but the fact that Polo runs through it that fast is horrifying.
It's probably good that he handed him
The treasury over, because how fast would he have run through this entire fortune?
Exactly.
Gosh, he'd have smashed the Roman economy in no time. But the thing is, Antonius and Polo are sent off to go retrieve it. Obviously, you have to have Antonius supervised because and if they had put Decimus Brutus, he'd have also been sent, because you don't want Antonius running roughshod with that money, and you don't want Polo running roughshod with that money. Gosh, but at least Antonius, I will give him some credit, because there's a lot of soldiers involved. He's obviously going to have to do what he's told. But that said, at a few points historically, he did run roughshod over some money that he was given by Caesar when he shouldn't have. Whoops. But we then get the first hint of the kind of relationship between Caesar and Octavius. When Octavius is called Little Owl, which historically Octavius, or rather Augustus, addressed his grandsons as his duckies, I think it was, his ducks. And the thing is, this was a love term. And the truth of the matter is that we can glean from this that this was the sort of intimate love name that men back then gave their children or their grandchildren. And one has to also bear in mind that Tolkien had, for a nickname, for example, for his sons, my dearests and my darlings. Which, what this means is that, well, let's be honest, in older times, men were open about the affections they had for their kids. And Octavius is essentially the adoptive son of Caesar. Octavius did not really have any father figures, historically, outside of Julius Caesar, which you can imagine how that formed him. And the truth of the matter is that his doting great uncle, calling him my little owl, or something to that effect, actually makes some degree of sense. And so, that being said, you also have to bear in mind, nobody saw any real potential in Octavius, somehow. He was very good at dissimulation, at pretending he was mid intellectually, when in reality he was a towering intellect who made Cicero look like a jock. Like, made Cicero look like Gaston. And Cicero was a genius. Like, you take the person with the highest IQ today, and I bet you anything, they'd be the dumbest person in the room if you stuck them next to Augustus. Augustus was that smart. And everybody else was playing checkers. He was playing chess. And Caesar was the only man who looked that boy in the eye and knew. And between Caesar and Augustus was way smarter.
And I like that so far in the series, you have, the young actor for Augustus is not as good as the latter, as the older one. But here, we see him slink off, hide, pay attention to everything. He's observing some things.
And he's learning.
He doesn't say as much.
And here's the thing. How does Caesar react to it? Caesar is just like, yeah, okay. No, I expect this. And like, and then he basically like all but takes him aside. And the way he's referring to him and even looking at him, it's like, he did not father this boy, but in his heart and mind, what is Octavius? His son. And he dotes on him and loves him like a child. And this is really the truth of the matter. Historically, it is very likely that there was such a bond. Caesar, now, when Octavius was almost on his deathbed, as a young man, as a young boy, in his adolescence, he had a lot of these fits. Caesar at one point delayed his return to war to stay by Octavius' side, at one point, to nurse him back to health, himself. By his own hand, apparently. There was such a bond between the two. And in later years, Augustus continued to honor his great uncle and adoptive father. Now, I've seen some books or novels where they show Augustus as being not exactly close to Caesar. No, you have to lean in. Augustus was his boy. This was a father-son bond between the two. And Augustus exploited it. But here's the thing. Caesar knew what kind of boy he had on his hands. And I argue, I don't think Caesar, even if he had biological sons, would have favored them over Augustus. Because what's the point of favoring them if who's just going to inevitably climb up to the throne? Octavius.
It seems that of everyone in a position of authority, Caesar is the only one that asked Augustus, "What do you think on this matter?"
Yeah, like he's asking him here, and he's treating him like a boy, but it's different than say how Antonius treats him in this series. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And historically, like Octavius was a very uncanny individual. And in one of the behind the scene DVD stuff, one of the writers I think says, or historian says, the thing about Augustus was he could walk into a room, size everyone up, psychoanalyze them all, and figure out how to break them and how to manipulate and use them, and knows what motivates them. And so he must have been a terrifying person to be around, because you didn't know what he knew. You didn't know how much he knew. You just knew he knew, and he'd use it. And so there's something very chilling about Augustus. On the other hand, he was a remarkably charismatic man. So it must have been very amazing being in his presence. Same with Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was like, even 2,000 years later, people are still charmed by his charisma. Like, people talk about Winston Churchill. He was nothing compared to Caesar or Augustus. Even Napoleon, as much as I like him, or Charles de Gaulle, they must have been nothing compared to these guys. And the fact that the Romans had two back-to-back, that's scary and impressive. But anyways, the episode ends with Caesar having a seizure, which you might know more than I do about such things. I know more about what, like, Octavius just staring a little wigged out the way he did. That I've experienced. I've gone to Japan and had classmates who were epileptic and had seizures. You've had your share, and I've observed you have them. And actually, at the age that Augustus would be at in this series, I remember that. It was very stunning and shocking. So it's something that, this might sound weird, outside looking in, you never get used to, I find. Like, kudos to our mother. She's gotten used to it. Kudos to our family friend Andrew. He's used to it. Our oldest brother. I'm not going to lie, Dan. I've never gotten used to it. So
yeah, and the one thing about being epileptic is that for me, it's primarily the lower hypothalamus, the region that concentrates on short-term memory.
Yeah.
So stuff like dates, names, that I have trouble with.
But your long-term memory is bloody remarkable.
Yeah, because a name from yesterday I won't remember. 5 years from now, I'll remember that name.
I don't know how.
And I can imagine that someone like Caesar might have holes in his short-term aspects of his memory.
Yeah.
Because of the seizures.
But
one thing I do when I suspect I may have had a seizure is that I reflect on what happened before that day, and if I see...
So being in your brain is like a noir movie. I was in my office when this tall glass of water walked in.
And
it's like a Dick Tracy novel.
Yeah, which I usually can tell when suddenly I feel sluggish. I reflect on what happened that day.
Yeah.
And
but with Caesar, he would have, like, in the series they give him, like, with some names he ends up asking Posca, his slave, what was her name? And you have Posca struggling to remember at one point. Cecilia. If Caesar. Cecilia. And where he talks about the man, the chief augur's wife, Cecilia. And there are a few scenes where he's like, what was this person's name? Cleopatra Dominus. And where he keeps Posca around because there's some issue with the short-term memory. But when you read his Wars in Gaul, I've read a bit of them. He didn't have, like, his memory for names, his memory for everything, short and long term, perfect. So I don't know, like, I don't think he had any holes, but he might have had a few minor holes in his memory. But if he did, he'd have had his slaves to remind him. But on the other hand, we have to be honest. Like I said, I've read some of his work. I don't think he had any holes in that memory. So his epilepsy was probably not quite that bad.
And figuring out which part of the brain was the primary location of seizures is something would
it
be.
might have been the part of the brain where morality sometimes is eventually, because eventually his morality started to wear off. Yeah, I know there's the power corrupts thing, but there's also other aspects of his morality that started to fall away near to the end, especially in regards to propriety and how he's supposed to behave in the Senate and whatnot. So it might have been there in that part of the brain. I don't know which part that is, but it might have been there. I know Caligula probably had some measure of epilepsy as well, and his entire sense of decorum was shot. His entire sense of reason was shot.
I think Caligula, his seizures would have probably been located more at the frontal lobe.
Yeah.
Where self-control is what is the...
Exactly.
Because it's only during adolescence and childhood. That's when...
Caesar, I think maybe it was lightly in in that same part. His self-control eventually near the end was not. Yeah. But on the other hand, there is a certain amount of power there that corrupted both of them. Caesar was losing a little touch with reality near the end. Like the Caesar of 44 BC and the Caesar of 50 BC, which is about the time that this episode takes place in, are two very different men in a lot of ways. Now, on the other hand, I'm not going to lie, I find myself, when I read anything about Caesar or by Caesar, I'm charmed by him. It's hard not to be charmed by him. He's very charming. But then when you read about the Caesar of 44 BC, it's hard not to be repulsed by him and just find him a dunce and a bit of a contemptible figure. He's not likable. So, yeah. Now let's rate this episode. I'm going to rate this hardcore 3.3.
3.1.
You're hating on this thing.
It's a good episode.
Mm-hmm.
And sure, for me, a bit of the highlight is Varenus and Polo.
And even Niobe.
Niobe, and even Augustus. The fact that I like that Caesar, a couple of times, Caesar was probably the only person to notice Augustus is there observing the situation and calculating.
Yeah. And he's clearly encouraging him and training him. I really like that relationship. What I did not like was the Quintus Pompeius thing, because he's not historically accurate. Stick with the historic figures. But other than that, I don't think we've got much more to talk about. So don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were, well, Lucius Varenus and Pullo beating up a fictional dude.